Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. In this episode, as promised, we're going to look into a crucial and key question that I don't think any of us asked in terms of the Chris Watts case. As I did in the previous episode, I'm going to take you through what I call True Crime Rocket Science, so some of the thinking that I've developed over the course of writing 100 books. But before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed yet to the channel, please do. You can click the blue icon in the bottom right of the screen. For those of you who have subscribed, we're up to over 25,800 in the last couple of days. Thank you very much. Like, share, leave a comment, and let's get started. So over a couple of years writing about a lot of high-profile cases and a lot of high-profile criminals dealing with their various situations, psychologies, scenarios, I'm often confronted with what I call either-or scenarios. So, either this happened or that happened. And what I've noticed is often when there's a significant tug of war between the two, in other words, where you can't sort of decide, you just can't come to kind of closure, because the pendulum seems to swing from the one to the other and back again. I've noticed that often in those scenarios, it's not exclusive. It's not a question of either or. Couldn't it be both? Now, one way to perhaps help you remember this concept is to go to Forrest Gump, of all places. And you may remember that at one point he was standing in front of Jenny's grave, and he was trying to figure out what was happening, what had happened to her, how life works, right? And he said something like this. He said, I don't know if we each have a destiny or if we're all just floating around accidental, like on a breeze. But I think maybe it's both. Maybe both is happening at the same time. And just think about that. Something happening accidentally, but it's also destiny at the same time. And there's a really good example where you can really believe in destiny, and then at other times also believe that things seem to happen accidentally, sometimes fortuitously, sometimes serendipitously, sometimes in a way that we don't like. Bad things happen to good people kind of thing. This is a little bit different to that. This is something where it is to do with two seemingly opposing psychologies, but dealing with a true crime scenario. So what are we talking about here? So I remember very, very early on, so basically when the Sermon on the Porch came out, in the very early days of the Watts case, when the sense was that Chris Watts probably committed this crime, obviously long before the discovery came out, you were sort of trying to build a scenario in your mind, and you were trying to think what probably happened here, right? And that is an excellent place to start, but it's also a place we tend to depart from prematurely. And this is what I mean. When you consider Chris Watts' dilemma, right, from his perspective, from his psychology and from his criminal psychology perspective, consider Chris Watts' dilemma, and this is where these two opposing questions come about. The crucial question we all forgot to ask, right? Maybe the title of this video should be The Crucial Question We All Forgot to Answer. And it's this. On Sunday night, Chris Watts wanted to get rid of his family, right? On Sunday night, not Monday. He wanted to get rid of his family earlier, sooner rather than later, because he meant to be up at sort of 5:30 or so. When I say up, I mean out of the house on his way to Survey 319. And it does actually appear as if he was late for that he actually sent a text saying, "I'm there," I think 20 minutes before he actually arrived, which tends to suggest he was behind schedule, right? Now, if you think of it in a general way, I'm sensitive to the fact that what we're talking about are real people. There were real victims in this case. They're buried in a real cemetery. They are really not with us anymore. So it's not just playing games with ideas. But to be serious about it, you've got to kind of make it quite personal. And you've got to ask yourself, in a practical way, certainly not saying, do you have kind of these intentions? And I suppose there's another way to frame it. If you want to pack 3 suitcases before leaving early the next morning on a holiday or for a flight, would you do that the night before, or would you do that the morning before? And you might say, well, it depends, or I don't know if I would necessarily do it one way or the other. And that's where it becomes a little bit different in terms of a murder scenario, because that's something you wouldn't really want to leave till the last minute, because it involves a lot of unknowns. It's a fundamental and powerful and very risky change that you're making to your life and the lives of these other people. And is it something that you would want to postpone, or is it something you'd want to get over with? Now, this is again a tricky area, because you could say Chris Watts' psychology has always been to postpone things to the last moment. And you could argue when he killed Shanann was at the last moment, meaning, it was at the end of her long trip in North Carolina, 5-6 weeks there, and then at the end of the trip. So in other words, it was the final time Shanann was coming home for keeps, kind of thing. And in that sense, it was the last moment. So you can make that argument. So I've got a feeling I might be confusing you. Let me just be very clear about this crucial question we talking about. The crucial question we've all forgot to ask. And it's basically, Chris Watts had to decide whether to kill the children before Shanann arrived or afterwards, right? The dilemma he's in is that he doesn't know when Shanann's going to arrive. And added to that is the dilemma of, if he kills the children and Shanann, something else happens. Perhaps her flight is delayed by another day. Perhaps Shanann arrives slightly earlier, whatever the case is, and surprises him, and he's now killed the children, and he's unable to kill her, whatever the case may be. In other words, there's a scenario where he's killed his own children, and because he doesn't kill Shanann, he fails at what he's trying to achieve, which is not go through a divorce, be able to be with Kissinger and all that kind of thing. Does that make sense? So what I'm trying to say is, if he kills the children first and fails to kill Shanann, then he's back to square one. He's still not going to get what he wants in this hypothetical scenario, right? The other side of that coin, so the crucial question we need to ask is, would he want to, or would he prefer to kill the children after killing Shanann? Now, the problem with that scenario, if you really think it through, is having children alive in the house while he's attacking his wife. Well, number one, there are 2 children. So it's not just one child, it's 2 that are potentially going to be running around the house. They are uncertain aspects that are beyond his control. They could cry, they could run out the house, perhaps that's why he latched the door. They could interfere with what he's doing. They could, in other words, try and come to Shanann's rescue, try and pinch him and hit him while he's doing whatever he's doing. But anyway, the point is that it's kind of a risky thing. It's a risky thing to attack Shanann, and that could rouse the children, in other words, wake them up, both children, leading to them crying and a kind of an uncertain state. Does that make sense? And that is the dilemma we're sort of dealing with, which knowing who Chris Watts is, knowing the circumstances of this case, which is more likely, that he would kill the children before the time or afterwards. Now, on paper, this is again just in a criminal situation, one would anticipate that Watts would want to kill the children first, because first of all that would be in a way easier, and then that would be taken care of, right? So just in terms of the criminal psychology aspect, it would make sense for him to do that, because also it wouldn't be a case that they would get up later on. The counter to that is, what if something went wrong with Shanann and he wasn't able to subdue her, or she fought him off, or she arrived home at a time that he didn't expect and caught her unawares, and kind of, something like that. Then he would have essentially committed the crime, in inverted commas, for nothing. Right? So you've kind of got these two opposing psychologies, and you say, well, which one is more likely? And for a long time, I definitely gravitated to the first one, and I actually originally thought, okay, when is the last time anybody saw the children? And it seemed to be Friday in the very early reporting of the case. And I was actually quite convinced for a couple of days that the children had died, maybe even longer than a couple of days, a couple of weeks, that the children actually had been killed very early on. So early on the weekend. And I kind of reasoned that he did that because he wanted to get back to Kessinger. And of course, at that time, we didn't know that he got a babysitter. If someone had said to you that this had happened, and we don't know what the chronology is, but in the middle of the weekend, Chris Watts left home and went to see his mistress, and had an intimate relations with her, twice in fact, you'd sort of think to yourself, wow, what about the children? And had they ever hired a babysitter before? Answer, no, right? So that would be kind of an intuitive thing to think. But as it turned out, the children were seen right up until kind of the last moment on Sunday afternoon, fairly late afternoon, say 4:30. And so it all added up to plausible deniability. And the whole plausible deniability thing is so strong in this case, because he also hides the entire disposal of the bodies within plausible deniability. I'm just getting up, going to work. I'm not doing anything unusual. I'm just getting up, going to work. Of course, if you'd asked his colleagues, did he normally just go straight to the well site? No. Did he normally, volunteer to do something like that? No. Was it normal for him not to go to the office first? No. And so this brings us to the crucial answer to this question that I say we forgot to ask. And the answer, as I say, if you apply true crime rocket science to it, this whole idea that it's not either or, it's actually both. Now, on the face of it, you might say, yes, but that doesn't make any sense. How on earth could he kill the children before and after Shanann arrived? And I think that is exactly the question Watts was sort of trying to solve. And he needed to solve it because he, first of all, wanted to speak to Kessinger that night. So he was dying to talk to her, have a last conversation before Shanann got back. And he didn't want to be disturbed. He wanted to sort of, in the same way of hiring a babysitter or the family going to North Carolina, he wanted the children out of the picture, right? And he was able to have this long conversation, 111 minutes, with the television on loudly. And I've often wondered about that. Was the television on because he knew they weren't alive, or was it on in case, if they were alive, it would wake him up and they would come and say, Dad, I can't sleep, kind of thing. And he would want that to happen if they were conscious. Now, this is what I'm getting at. This is what I mean by the two things happening simultaneously. By sedating his children, he could kind of have both those situations happening at the same time. So, first of all, they're not dead, but they are comatose, they are sedated, they are effectively sleeping, but a very deep sleep, a sleep they're not going to wake up from in terms of, in terms of normal sleep. And so what he wants to do is put them in a situation where, if Shanann finds them the next morning, and they will be alive, right? They will have maybe be a bit groggy, but they will be alive. And so he's now taken care of the first part of the equation, which is the night before, right? So that he can call Kissinger. The other part that he's taken care of, theoretically, is that when Shanann arrives home, the kids aren't going to be in the way because they're going to be also similarly sedated, right? The question here is, would he have wanted to overdose them on Sunday night or sedate them Sunday night? I suspect the answer is the same answer in terms of Nico, was that Chris Watts was trying to bring about a miscarriage with Nico, and the fact that he didn't succeed wasn't because he wasn't sure about it. It was because he just didn't give the right dose. And so he tried again. And I think the same happened with his own children. He tried to give a dose not to sedate them, but to kill them. All I'm saying is that it is possible, when he figured out that the dose that he gave to Nico and that didn't work, he perhaps thought, well, I can maybe use this on my children to keep them out of the game, if I can put it that way. That he maybe thought of it as something that he could use to his advantage, almost the same as tying someone's hands, while you are working on another victim, if that makes sense. So I don't know whether Chris Watts was smart enough to kind of think, well, I will give a certain amount of this painkiller, oxycodone, to my children, and the whole idea is that they will be out of the picture, unconscious for this specific window period, and then when Shanann returns, after she's returned and I've executed that part of the crime, with that part done, then I can go to my children and do XYZ. And I've got an idea that the reason there are no petechial hemorrhages in either of the children is because he didn't smother or strangle or asphyxiate both of his children. Why? Because he sedated them. And the sedation was to get them out of the picture. And the question that remains is still, did he mean to overdose them or sedate them? And I would argue that it's overdose them. But you could theoretically make the argument that it's both, that Chris Watts is trying to create a situation where the children would kind of come back to life the next day, and if needed, almost like remote control, come back he could sort of resurrect them if the thing that he planned to do to Shanann didn't work, if it backfired or for whatever reason he wasn't able to pull it off. Then you could kind of bring the children kind of back to life, just in terms of the chemicals wearing off in their systems, right? My only reservations with this idea is that why, when Chris Watts was asked to send photos of the children, why didn't he do that? Was he distracted? Did he purposefully not comply? And, one of the reasons why he might not have complied was if one or both of the children were already dead at that point. Also, if one of the children was sort of not necessarily in bed, but being kind of processed somewhere. Again, I apologize for talking in this way, but we're just trying to figure out possibly what happened in the absence of what's telling us. I've heard a lot of people say there's absolutely no proof that the children could have been sedated because nothing was found in the toxicology, and that's just a crazy argument because they were in oil, they were in a corrosive substance for 4 days, a hot corrosive substance. And something like oxycodone has a very short half-life. So even if you're not suspended in chemicals, hot chemicals, even if you just take normal opiates, they have a very short half-life and they are out of your system pretty quickly. So that argument doesn't necessarily apply. The other part that we don't know is how much of the autopsy reports are available and how much have been withheld. We just don't know that for a fact. And Chris Watts has hinted that Oxy's part of this whole story, which has also kind of come out in this latest book, hasn't it? So just to summarize, as I say, the question that you've kind of had two groups of people, in terms of the Watts case, trying to figure it out. The group saying, I'm absolutely certain that the children were killed first, and if that was true, that Shanann, it was unlikely that Shanann would have made it into bed, because she would have, checked on the children more than likely, and that would have led to something, a confrontation, right? That's kind of the one school of thought. The other school of thought is that, it's possible that he had them sedated, so if Shanann did arrive home and did sort of check on them, oh, there they are lying in bed, and then did get into bed, you could have a situation like that sort of plays into the scenario Watts is talking about. I just don't think it's very likely. I don't think Shanann ever saw him that night, meaning I don't think they spoke to one another. I don't think she saw him coming. And even in his very first confession, he talks about her strangling the children first, and then he ran up to her from behind. And so even in his own scenario of his attack on Shanann, it is from behind. It is Shanann lying on a weird surface, right? In this case, a bed, but with a body on the bed, Cece's body, and then him lying on top of Shanann. And that made me certainly think that it could have happened on the staircase. Another example, though I feel a bit cautious about talking about it, is the John Benet Ramsey case, when you say, did this happen or did that happen? And I think in a couple of instances, the answer is both. Was this person involved or was that person involved? And I think the answer could be both. And I just found that quite a valuable tool in true crime rocket science to figure out some things where you sort of feel like, well, I'm really, really sure it's this. And then later on you feel like, well, I can see there's such reinforcement for that. And then it takes a bit of a kind of lateral thinking, a leap in lateral thinking, to kind of connect the two and say, well, couldn't they both be true in some way? So just to kind of conclude, if we take the other polarity in this case, this idea that Chris Watts couldn't have acted alone, someone else drove him to do it, or someone else was his accessory, or someone else was involved, and you say, no, it's either the one or the other, but you sort of feel like, but there is evidence of this other person. That's a good example where, well, couldn't they both be true? And the both being true doesn't mean that this other person was involved, as in was running around the crime scene, had a motive, any of that, but just that, yes, there was a person who was very involved with Chris Watts, who was very instrumental in what he was thinking and doing, who was very much part of his criminal psychology. Yes, it's true. But you've got to draw the line and say, well, the person who ultimately committed the crime wasn't this other person. Does that make sense? Thank you for listening. If you haven't subscribed, please do like, share, leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time.